Medicine was supposed to save us. But what if I told you it's killing us slowly?
Even though I'm a physician, I realize that doctors can't make me healthy. Doctors just make me less sick.
Behind the white coats and prescriptions lies a hidden crisis. Chronic diseases exploding at biblical levels, fueled by lies we were taught in medical school.
Literally, your risk of chronic disease goes up if you sleep much less than 6 or 7 hours or more than 9 or 10 hours. These chronic diseases, we were saying, are biblical proportions, unseen before in history.
Today, we expose the shocking truth about nutrition, medicine, and the dangerous myths that could be destroying your health right now.
Lifestyle is the most powerful medicine that most of us will ever experience.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, and welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and I'm here with Dr. Robert Lufkin. He is the author of a book called The Lies I Taught in Medical School, which was really evocative to me when I read that. I can't wait to dig in and maybe learn something, change some of my ideas about the medical system. And he's also a professor at UCLA and USC. So, Dr. Lufkin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, so I always like to start with a personal story. So how did you get into this? How did you get into being a doctor and starting to debunk some of these lies out there?
Yeah, I guess I probably started when I was growing up. My mom was a dietitian, which is someone who specializes in nutrition, and she worked in hospitals and all. So I was raised with the knowledge that somehow what we ate affected our health. So I kind of grew up that way, and I was always interested in the way biology worked and human beings, and one thing led to another, and I just wound up in medical school and really enjoyed it. It's a wonderful, wonderful career. It's fascinating, and the knowledge keeps evolving, it keeps changing, and it's only accelerating faster and faster, like so many things today.
Yeah, so okay. So you started to learn about nutrition, and then you wanted to go into being a doctor. What was that like? I mean, what decade were you learning about medicine?
You mean when was I here for
Yeah,
what?
medical school, yeah, because you said things advanced so
Oh,
quickly. Yeah.
oh yeah, yeah. Well, I went to medical school a long time ago. So I went in the 70s, and so but even now, uh, things are changing so fast that it's hard for people to keep up with things, even in their own field, much less in general areas of medicine. So it's only getting more and more challenging.
Yeah, it's rapidly evolving. But both my parents are dentists. And they went dental school in the 80s, and again, they're saying how some of their knowledge was like out of date, or what I think we'll talk about later is like some of the new knowledge actually contradicts it and isn't as accurate. Because I think there are like agendas and things that are coming into the medical process.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so you mentioned in our brief that you struggle with a chronic illness. Can you say more about that? Like what was your personal story?
Yeah, well, if I could, let me just sort of preface a little bit about Western medicine. It just full disclaimer, I'm a product of Western medicine. Working as a professor, sort of Western allopathic medicine, but my book is very, very critical of Western medicine. And people say, well, how can you do that? And the reason is Western medicine. I'm still a fan of Western medicine. If I get hit by a car today, I want a blood transfusion. I want a splenectomy. I want my bones set. Those emergency things that Western medicine can do. In fact, the century where I went to medical school in the 20th century, Western medicine transformed the lives of really all of us, the whole world. It made the world a better place to live for humanity. The pills, the surgeries that were developed, were nothing short of magical, largely through public health measures, infectious disease, and this sort of thing. But it was amazing. The problem is today, the 21st century, we're facing literally a tsunami of what are called chronic diseases. And these diseases, while they were present in the 20th century, they're nowhere near the numbers that they are now, where today they're almost in biblical numbers, never before seen in history. And by chronic diseases, I mean everything from obesity, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, and mental illness. All of these diseases are exploding. And the problem is when Western medicine takes the pills and the surgeries that they were, so effective and so good at in the 20th century and tries to apply those to these chronic diseases, an interesting thing happens. The pills and surgery will work in many cases for the symptoms and make the symptoms better. But in the majority of cases, they don't really address the underlying what's called root cause. In other words, the disease continues to progress and gets worse and worse and worse, on and on and on. And that's really the challenge that we're facing. And it was, to answer your question, finally getting around to your question, what happened to me was I was minding my own business as a, professor, teaching, doing research, practicing medicine, when I came down with 4 of these chronic diseases not long ago. And, like any good patient, I went to my doctors and they prescribed a drug for each one of those, a pill for each one of those diseases. And, I said, wow, are there any other, what else should I be doing? Any other choices? What about lifestyle? I hear all about lifestyle all the time. They say, nah, lifestyle doesn't really work. You're going to be on these pills for the rest of your life. So get used to it. And at that point, I had 2 young daughters in school. I still have young daughters in school, but it was a few years ago, and I realized it wasn't going to end well. So that really forced me to look deeply at my beliefs and what and I realized that there's been a whole knowledge of new research that I wasn't aware of, and that many of my colleagues are still not aware of, that shows how powerful these lifestyle things can be at really getting at the root cause. So, long story short, I made some relatively simple changes in my lifestyle, and I was able to reverse all 4 of the chronic diseases. The doctors couldn't believe it. They thought the labs were broken or something, and I was able to go off all medication. So now I've made it my mission to help other people take back their health and hopefully not make the same mistakes that I did, and realizing that lifestyle matters and it's a significant tool to make us make us be healthier.
Yeah, so when you're talking about lifestyle, let's just like deconstruct that. Is it, my mind goes to like diet, exercise, sleep, maybe meditation. What would you put underneath that umbrella?
Yeah, I mean, lifestyle, means many things to many people, but in my particular case, and what we talk about the book, it really boils down to 4 things. Before I talk about those 4 things, one other general principle that was kind of a wake up call for me as a physician. Even though I'm a physician, I realize that doctors can't make me healthy. Doctors just make me less sick. We go to doctors when I have a disease and I, want to treat the symptoms and maybe the root cause if I'm lucky. But if I want to be healthy, that boils down to lifestyle. But that's a very empowering thing because a doctor can't do lifestyle for a patient. Only the patient can do lifestyle. And it's something that as a patient, we're in charge of. We have agency over. Every morning when I get up, I get to decide how my lifestyle goes, more or less, how I sleep, when I eat, how I exercise. And those are really the 4 things that the main things in lifestyle, just basically nutrition, sleep, exercise, and stress and mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got tons of questions right on that. But I guess the first one that comes up a lot in my work is how do you keep people motivated? Right, because I think out there's so much information about this too. There's all these influencers and podcasters and all this stuff, right? But what I see is that people fall off the wagon really quick because they can be overwhelmed by needing to change everything all at once.
Yeah, the changing lifestyle may mean changing habits that we've had and changing who we are really. And that's one reason that giving pills or surgery is so successful. If I go to a doctor, like many patients, I would rather have a pill that I only take once a day than have a lecture about changing my lifestyle and literally changing who I am, who I hang out with, who I eat, what I eat, all that stuff, because that requires a big investment. Taking a pill once a day doesn't require that much. Even surgery, when you think about it, I might have to get off of work for a week and to recover from my surgery, but then I'm done. I can go back to my other lifestyle. And people don't realize that lifestyle is what matters, and the motivation, to answer your question, is really key because it requires us to be engaged because I'm in charge of my lifestyle. My doctor's not in charge of my lifestyle, like we talked about before. And the problem is, as a doctor, I used to think that the disease started when I diagnosed it, right? In other words, someone comes in my office and their blood sugar's high. I go, "Oh, okay, you're a diabetic. Now you've got the diagnosis and, we can give you pills and we can do this stuff." Or, "Oh, you forgot your keys. Oh, you have Alzheimer's disease. Okay, da da da." And I'm not trying to make light of any of these, but it's just to illustrate a principle. What I'm realizing now is that these chronic diseases that I mentioned, that includes those two and everything, all the others that I mentioned, they don't begin the moment the doctor diagnoses them. And they actually begin years to decades before that. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means one thing. It means one, if I don't have any if I don't have any diagnosis from the doctor, and I have friends who go to the doctor and say, "Hey, my doctor says I'm fine. I don't need to do your lifestyle thing. I don't need to do anything." Well, the point is, if we wait until the doctor diagnoses one of these diseases, and just to be clear, you and I and most of our audience is going to die of one of these diseases. Statistically, it's a short list of what people die of, heart attack, cancer, Alzheimer's, those are what people die of. So we're all going to get one of those. But as Jim Morrison said, nobody gets out alive, right? So, but the point is, we want to push them back as far as we can. Why get the heart attack at 50? Why get it at 70? Why get it at 90? I want it at 130. And do it that way if anybody's asking. But so the point is, even when we're healthy, if we wait till the doctor diagnoses something, we've missed a tremendous opportunity for prevention. And the fascinating thing is the same lifestyle techniques that will improve my risk of avoiding heart disease will also improve my risk of avoiding Alzheimer's and also stroke and heart attack and cancer and diabetes and hypertension and even obesity. So it's the same general playbook. It revolves around something called metabolic disease, things like insulin resistance, oxidation, and inflammation, which are really the key drivers for all of these. But lifestyle is probably it's the most powerful medicine that most of us will ever experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I think like the preventive measures, we need way more of that in our medical system, way more education around that, support, coaching, therapy, whatever it needs to be to like you said, intervene early and often. So it doesn't have to get to a big surgery or something. I'm curious, this may be a little bit of a tangent, but I got my graduate education at Naropa University, which is like a Buddhist school out here in Boulder, Colorado. And I learned about acupuncture and the chakra systems and things like that, some Eastern medicine. And they talk about balance, right? There's like 5 elements in acupuncture. I think there's like 8 different chakras, right? I'm curious, did you pull from Eastern medicine at all when you started to look at some of these more lifestyle things? Because, a lot of their thesis is like, if these things are out of whack, that's where disease comes from, right? It comes from like a lack of harmony within the system.
Yeah, and I certainly, I accept them. I'm open to many different schools of treatment and health: Ayurvedic medicine, Buddhist medicine, Chinese medicine, and I think they can each contribute something. Western allopathic medicine doesn't have a monopoly on anything. Maybe for the automobile accident, I'll I'll want to get that, but even, managing chronic diseases, this notion of balance and, things being in and out of balance is an important one that I think that flows through all healthcare systems and all medical systems of understanding, including Western medicine. It just doesn't get the emphasis that it should.
For sure. Yeah, and I see it's like I think they're talking about the same thing. It didn't have the technology that we have now. So when we're talking about like, blood glucose, right, and, VO2 max and things like that, right? They're probably diagnosing it using more primitive means. But there is, I think, still something there. We just have science now to like put numbers on these things.
Yeah, and there's evidence too with, acupuncture is a very powerful technology, and it does something with our bodies, and there are biochemical, electromagnetic, evidence of these energy points and chakras and all. So we really don't know the whole story with this. And then when we get into the fourth aspect of lifestyle, which is stress and mindset, then those those disciplines play an outsized role in this that, the Western medicine doesn't have nearly as much to add.
Right. I mean, I think for Western culture was like alcohol, right? Was like the answer, which has other kind of detrimental effects on the system.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, so I'm curious. Let's kind of dive back in. You talked about kind of metabolic health, right? So can you say more about that? And feel free to go like as technical as you want, on this show. So I'm curious, like as you break that down, what does that include?
Yeah, what does metabolic health mean? Well, the metabolism refers to the basic way that energy is uh, uh, derived from food sources and then used in our body, primarily through the mitochondria, which is a intracellular organelle that drives energy. And we're now understanding that disordered metabolism or disordered effects can can cause changes certainly in all of the chronic diseases that I mentioned: diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, even mental illness. At a mitochondrial level, there's breakthroughs now, and so the idea that disruption in our metabolism, and as I mentioned, primarily through insulin resistance is one sign of it. Inflammation, which is another sign which drives aging and these chronic diseases, and also oxidation. These things manifest overall as metabolic disease, and it's interesting that these chronic diseases, we were saying they're biblical proportions, unseen before in history. What does that mean? Well, in the United States today, most people are either overweight or fat. Most people, over 50% of people, either have high blood pressure, hypertension, or they're treated for it. And it goes on and on. Almost half people have prediabetes or diabetes. And in fact, there are certain markers for metabolic disease, particular at the root of these things like abdominal girth, which is just, your waistline, but also your blood pressure, things things like triglycerides and HDL. And studies have shown that almost 90% of Americans have one abnormality, one of these metabolic abnormalities. So the point is that most people have one of these chronic diseases, at least one. Most adults do. And most people, like 90% of people, have some aspect of metabolic dysfunction. And all of these things increase with aging too. So these metabolic diseases are tightly linked to aging because the incidence of all of these chronic diseases increase with aging as well. And when we fix our just to finish the thought, sorry, when we fix our metabolic health, an interesting thing happens. we actually live longer. The lifespan increases, not only the health span, which is the time until the disease hits, but actually the time until death increases as well. And that's why the second to the last chapter, the penultimate chapter in the book, is on longevity. And when I started writing the book, I had no interest in writing anything about longevity. It wasn't even on my radar. But I realized that once you start fixing your metabolic health through lifestyle, all these things, the cancer, the heart disease, the Alzheimer's disease, the mental illness, the obesity, these get pushed back. And when they get pushed back, the result is longevity. And the same metabolic lifestyle choices that make us healthier as far as these diseases are also longevity tools.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. Absolutely. Yeah. So let's start talking about like what's wrong, and then we talk about how to fix it. Because as you're talking, it's like, yeah, traditional American culture, right? It's like high stress, poor diet, a lot of carbs, a lot of fat, like sedentary lifestyle, right? Like lack of sleep. People are overworking. It seems like in every category you're talking about, we are just failing, like what's going on out there, man?
Yeah, and it's fascinating. You can, if you look back in time, the incidence of obesity started skyrocketing in the 1980s and 1990s. The incidence of diabetes took off then too. There was even a new disease called fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, that did not exist before 1980. And it's metabolically driven. Now it's the number one cause of liver failure and liver transplants. It's bypassed all other liver diseases. So something was going on in the 80s and 90s that really, really kicked these chronic diseases up. Although, they've been increasing all along, but it's interesting to speculate what it was.
Yeah. Well, what did your mind go to? Like I started thinking of like office jobs or the advent of like highly processed food, candies, sodas, McDonald's, right? Like it seems like that stuff really blew up in the 80s.
Yeah, the obvious targets were, many things happened. The tobacco industry that was so successful at a highly addictive product that unfortunately for them, legislation was being put in place that was going to really gut their sales, and they realized there wasn't a big future in tobacco. So in that time frame, in the 70s and 80s, the tobacco companies pivoted and they went into junk food. They took over and bought large junk food manufacturers, and it was right in their wheelhouse because it was another addictive substance that they could use the same advertising tricks, except they could now advertise to children, because with tobacco, it's against the law to advertise to children. But with junk food, you can sell addictive, unhealthy cereals to children with colorful pictures and cartoons on the box, and we've seen the result of that. So that's happened, and then in the 1980s, high fructose corn syrup was developed. It was a especially low cost type of sugar that replaced cane sugar and other things. And famously, Coke and Pepsi switched out their other sugars for high fructose corn syrup, and it basically went in all the junk foods. That was something else. And then the 1990s, before that point, all foods were essentially in the world were fried in beef tallow, which is beef fat, which is a healthy saturated fat that's very stable at high temperatures. And the problem was there was a belief then, and there's still a belief by many people, that saturated fat is somehow harmful and causing heart disease. So through a large campaign, they convinced Burger King and McDonald's, and soon everyone else in the world followed suit, to no longer fry foods in this healthy beef tallow, which was saturated fat. Instead, they used unsaturated fat or seed oils, which things like canola oil, corn oil, which one thing was very inexpensive because just like high fructose corn syrup, corn is subsidized by the federal government. So it's much less expensive than it really should be. So corn oil was cheap. And the other problem with it, though, at high temperature, seed oils release toxic breakdown products that we don't see with beef tallow. So that was another thing that's happened. And interestingly, in the last few months, we're now having, on a nationwide political level, we're having national politicians, using the word seed oils in their conversations, which I've never heard before. I'm not aware of it ever entering the national level. So, these issues are coming to a forefront, and hopefully we'll be seeing some changes with them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, hopefully, like some of that corruption or and revolving door ends. And I want to give you a chance to talk about that too. I read you probably this book, the China Study. Have you read that book?
Sure.
Yeah, and I like the second half of that book is about, people from these big processed food companies going to work for the FDA, right? And the idea that they're kind of like green lighting these things that are not that healthy and they have other agendas going on. I know you mentioned a little bit about that too. So can you speak to that of how this stuff got approved and passed? Because you would hope that there'd be somebody regulating or controlling some of these things or having some like warning labels if we know that they have detrimental effects on our health.
Yeah, I mean, the sad fact is, my mom, the dietitian, when she would go to her conferences, her dietitian conferences, they would be sponsored and paid for by McDonald's and Coke and junk food makers. And nutrition education was paid for by junk food companies. That's why you have, these crazy recommendations about what our children should eat. Similarly, though, it gets worse. Medical education for doctors is paid for by pharmaceutical companies. So there's all sorts of corrupt influences there. I mean, just the fact that there are only two countries in the world that allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise directly to patients because of the harm that it does. It's illegal everywhere except the United States and New Zealand. And that's one of the things that this new health administration is talking about getting rid of. Something that no Republicans or Democrats had done. Politics aside, no one's done it yet. So let's see what happens. But you know, uh, to your point, here's an example, the food pyramid that your audience may be familiar with. It's a pyramid shaped thing that lists all the food we should eat, with the bottom row is most of them. And now it's a food plate, but it's basically the same idea. And this has big impact on it, even though it's a US thing, it actually affects the world. The world looks to this for what a healthy meal consists of. It also drives what our kids are fed in schools, what, the military eats, if our veterans eat, what our prisons are, and everywhere. Well, Dr. Nina Teicholz just published a peer-reviewed study showing that the most recent food pyramid, or the food recommendations that were paid for by, or that were developed by the USDA, a federal committee, that 90% of the committee members who made the recommendations for the food pyramid had conflicts of interest with big food and junk food. And if you look at it, the bottom row of the food pyramid, what we're supposed to eat most of is all junk food. It's basically cereals, grains, breads, pasta, that kind of stuff. So, but these influences, they go on and on and on.
Yeah, it's crazy. I remember learning about that too, like having dairy be a category, right? Whereas I'm sure you can speak to it more, but dairy is like destroys your metabolic health and causes inflammation and can be quite unhealthy, especially for certain people of different ethnic backgrounds, right? That aren't able to process it or lactose intolerant. And that was a key part of the food pyramid. I think it was like second from the bottom or something.
Yeah, people, and it's a great point. People, the diet recommendations, they need to be personalized. Like you say, some people have problems with dairy, so they need to remove that. Other people have problems with grains, with gluten intolerance, or, I believe most people have problems with grains. They just don't realize it. It's a low grade inflammation that manifests other ways. But absolutely, certain food allergies, obviously, we need to curate our diets specifically for us as an individual. But having said that, there are certain I think, overarching trends that universally apply across the board. Things like avoiding seed oils. There's no group that seed oils are healthy for, or carbohydrates. Similarly, a high carbohydrate diet is unhealthy. And I don't know of any medical condition that would contradict that.
Yeah, totally. Right. And yeah, like I said, that was like the base of the period of the food pyramid was like eat as much carbs as possible, Whereas yeah, that just goes straight to fat and causes all kinds of issues. And I want to ask you kind of a specific question because you mentioned inflammation a few times. And yeah, I'm curious, for me and for our listeners too, of like what is that? Is there a way to get that diagnosed? I just see that word get tossed around all over the place. And it seems like it's kind of like white whale, mysterious thing. Like we know it's bad, but we don't know how to figure it out or what to do about it. But yeah, I'm just curious for you to speak on what inflammation is. And
Yeah, it's so challenging getting the words down and the definitions of things, but inflammation is a great example because inflammation actually is necessary for life. If we didn't have inflammation, we would die. And it's a healthy response to an acute injury. So for example, if I get stuck with a thorn in my skin, blood cells and inflammation will occur around the thorn. And inflammation means redness, swelling, might be some pain. The immune system kicks into play and basically protects the body from a foreign substance. And eventually the thorn falls out, the inflammation goes down, and this so-called acute inflammation goes away. And that's a healthy, literally life-saving kind of inflammation. The bad kind of inflammation, the kind that drives aging and all these chronic diseases that we mentioned, is what's called chronic inflammation. Chronic is the opposite of acute. It means something that occurs continuously over time. And what do we mean by chronic inflammation? Well, that's an inflammation or a body's reaction to something with it that doesn't resolve, that continues. Stress drives inflammation. If a lion chased me on the plains, if I was lucky, I might be able to outrun it maybe. And then, the stress would go away. I'd relax and everything else. But if I have a stress from my job, it may never go away. It's always there. It's hanging over me, the taxes or whatever. We all dream up things in our lives to add stress, and this stress drives inflammation, it drives chronic inflammation. And literally the inflammation, drives insulin resistance, it drives the markers for diabetes, it's associated with all the chronic diseases there. And it's fascinating because stress it's s people think stress is a result of what happens to me in my life, right? I have a stressful life. Actually, I don't think it works that way. I think stress is not a result of what happens to me in my life. It's rather the result of the meaning that I place on what happens to me in my life. In other words, I can have something very painful, like an operation for cancer, and it'll be very stressful and uncomfortable. And somebody else could have the same amount of pain and a very similar operation, but it would be a joyous experience. Why is that? Because it's the birth of their child through a C-section, and it's a joyous experience. It's happy. It's not stressful at all, and it's all about the meaning. And granted, some of the meaning we associate with things are not within conscious control. In other words, based on our childhood traumas, our experiences, our personalities. But it is still based on the meaning that we give it, whether we're completely in control of the meaning or not. But it's just fascinating, I think, the way this works. It's like, how do we view the world? What is our mindset? In other words, and I get up in the morning, is the world a scary place? Is it a dangerous place? I'm going to go out, I'm going to be attacked by a lion or by, a modern day lion, which may be, the stock market or some person walking down the street, versus, do I look at the world as a loving place full of opportunities and growth and joy and happiness? When I go out in the world, it's a beautiful day and I'm grateful to be alive. This can change then the meaning we assign to things, But it's fascinating. And some people believe, and I'm inclined to follow that too, that mindset may be one of the most powerful things overall for all these chronic diseases and our lifestyle and our longevity in itself.
But I agree, and that's why I do some of the work I do, right? Being a therapist is like helping people shift their mindset and understand their trauma, like you mentioned, that like they could be living with an old like data set, right? They're an old model that they had when they were a kid of the world being dangerous or scary or whatever, but they haven't updated it. They need help to like, shake free of those old hurts and pains and live in a world where there's a lot more freedom and love and create that for themselves. The mind body connection is always fascinating to me because you know, how do I say this? Like the placebo effect, right? The idea that there is a placebo effect, that you can think you're taking a medication and you actually heal your body because your mindset is in a place of hope and thinking that the thing is going to work is like pretty wild to me. You know, that the mind can heal the body, and it sounds like inflammation is one of those mechanisms.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, inflammation certainly plays a role, and mindset in itself drives inflammation through these things. It's stress, but like you're saying, the past influencing our future. The older we get into like grooves in our life. We have things figured out, which is good. It's called experience, but it also limits our creativity. In other words, we walk down the street. We don't look on either side because we walked down that street a dozen times. We don't need to look around. Well, we're missing an opportunity. And that's exciting potential of things like psychedelics, which actually lower the grooves in the record so you can get out of the groove and hey, you walk down the street, but it's like you've never done it before. It's like beginner's mind in Zen, it's a new thing and it offers a lot of possibilities. We're seeing it for PTSD and we're seeing it for anxiety and depression. And I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface with these really powerful medicines and how they'll affect mindset.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had a guest on a couple weeks ago. I was talking about ketamine therapy and was talking about how that actually reduces brain inflammation, right? And the idea like allows the brain to de-stress a little bit so it can create new neural pathways. Like that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool because I think for a long time psychedelics were very taboo and not mentioned and not researched and not even looked at. They were just discarded on like, part of the war on drugs. But now we can get people into fMRIs and into different scanners and all and see what they're actually doing to people. And it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. Like when they're controlled and they are focused and they are, applied to the right person, they are very, very powerful.
Yeah, and I think we're beginning to have an intellectual framework about how psychedelics work. Not we have a long way to go, clearly, but things like ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin, about the default mode network in the brain, and then turning things down and opening up opportunities and getting back to that beginner's mind. And then there's that period of time where you can either go back into the groove of all those childhood things, the way you thought the world was because your parents, whatever happened to you in your childhood, that's the way you think the world is, or you have an opportunity to reintegrate the world as perhaps a different place.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And, again, therapy or a coach can really help with that of like trying out new behaviors because you do have that window before, you fall back into the myelinated patterns and you're stuck in the groove. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about your book, right? Lies I taught in medical school. I'm curious, are there lies in particular that relate to men's health or mental health in general? I know one stat that I quote in some of my talks is that men don't go to the doctors, like men don't talk about their health, men don't disclose what's going on with them until, like you said, there's a catastrophic incident. But I'm curious for you, like what are some misconceptions around men's health?
Well, yeah, to your point about men and the different the different rates of seeking attention. I mean, I'm trying to think of men specific things like low testosterone. Testosterone is, of course, produced by men primarily. Women make it too, but not in the amount that men has it. And decreased testosterone has a lot of symptoms, but metabolic dysfunction can manifest as decreased testosterone and vice versa. And with aging, there is a general decrease in testosterone to the point where now there's a growing movement to supplement testosterone in older people, whereas before previously testosterone supplementation was something that, bodybuilders did, which was hyper normal levels to create huge muscle mass. We're not talking about that. We're talking about taking people through metabolic disease or through aging who have abnormally low testosterone, and then we bring them back to normal. And that can have dramatic mental effects as well as, effects throughout their whole lives, really, in their framework as well. So that's one thing that men can do. And were you asking about mental illness in particular
Yeah,
too?
mental as well too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was a real eye opener to me as I was writing this book, and this knowledge was just coming out as the book was being written. It just so happens. Chris Palmer, who I reference a lot in the book, is a psychiatrist from Harvard Medical School, and Georgia Ede, also another Harvard-trained psychiatrist, have both written about this extensively. But it's fascinating, the metabolically healthy diet, the diet that this lifestyle would recommend when given to patients with psychiatric conditions. And I'm talking, Chris deals with hospitalized, institutionalized people with schizoaffective disorders, manic depressive disorders, which are heavily medicated. They're in the hospital. And Chris made the observation, and others too, that many of the same drugs that are used for psychiatric conditions are epilepsy drugs. They're anti-seizure medicines, and it just so happens they overlap a little bit. Well, Chris wondered, one of the oldest treatments for epilepsy that worked for thousands of years and then was forgotten for almost a century is fasting. If you fast someone, pretty much their seizures will stop. Well, you can get the same effects of fasting with a low carbohydrate diet called a ketogenic diet. And it's now a mainline treatment for seizures. When drug therapy doesn't work, surgery doesn't work, ketogenic diets for seizures can work. So Chris in Georgia and other people wanted to try that with psychiatric patients. And what they found was, for some patients, and I want to be clear, it's not all, not across the board, but the fact that it works on anybody is amazing. For some of these patients, they went on the ketogenic diet, they get off the medicines, and some of them even went home and returned to life. And I remember a conversation I had with Chris afterwards. I said, "Hey, Chris, it's great. The work you're doing is fantastic. But hey, come on, between you and me, how do you know it's the diet? I mean, come on, there's so many other things." And he goes, "Well, for some of them, it's pretty clear cut, like Mr. Bill M. He was hospitalized schizophrenia, which is, as our audience may know, it's a medical condition where voices appear to the head. And it's practically the only condition where you hear voices. And, it indicates schizophrenia. And he had schizophrenia. He was hospitalized. He went on a ketogenic diet. He got off all medications, was discharged from the hospital, went back to his family, went back into society, got a job. I said, "Yeah, but how do you know it was the diet?" And Chris says, "Well, I keep in touch with him, obviously." And he tells me, he says, "I know when I'm going out of ketosis, which is the metabolic state when you're on a ketogenic diet." He goes, I know when I go out of ketosis, like if I have some junk food or something, I can tell because voices start talking to me again. The voices start coming back. And then as soon as he goes back on the diet, the voices stop. And for him, it was very, very powerful that way. But that begs the question, hey, thankfully, most of us don't have clinically diagnosed psychiatric conditions, right? But you have to wonder, we all have mental things that happen to us in our daily lives that may not cross the border into psychosis or schizophrenia or mania or anxiety, but we all have depression. We all have mild anxiety. Dealing with our kids, our bosses, our employees, our partners, we all have ups and downs like that. If this ketogenic diet is so powerful that it can reverse reverse schizophrenic disease. I wonder what eating junk food is doing to the rest of us. Is there any evidence for that? And of course, in the book we talk about the soda pop study, which was a correlative study. It's not controlled, it's not prospective, but they associated consumption with sugar sodas. The higher the consumption of sugar sodas, the more violent the children were, to the point of, crimes and guns. And to be clear, they did control for age, they controlled for gender, they controlled for socioeconomic things, they controlled for racial things, they controlled for, anything they could think of. The association still persisted. So, we can't, what a crazy world we're in today with all the politics and the polarization. Even diets are politicized now, and Republicans don't talk to Democrats anymore and vice versa. And you can't help but wonder, maybe some of that same stuff that happened in the 1980s and 90s that has completely upended all our other metabolism and all these chronic diseases isn't affecting the mental health of everyday people just walking around.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to open up, but you were afraid that it wouldn't be taken well? You ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So you do what you always do. You push it down, numb out the pain with a drink, a night out, or pornography. I've been there myself, and I know that men lack the outlets for emotional expression, which is why I founded Men's Therapy Online, a healing hub for men's mental health. If you've been knocked on your ass or just crave meaningful connection, join Men's Therapy Online, a community of men who just get it. We offer individual therapy, men's groups, and powerful retreats, all led by licensed therapists. At Men's Therapy Online, we will help you to get back on your feet and take your life to the next level. Start your journey today at menstherapy.online. Probably, right? I mean, I'm ready to sign off on that right away. I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of disease and unhealth and people that are really out of whack out there, right? I think diet is a huge part of it. It makes me think of the gut biome and health. And I know that's emerging science too, as we're starting to figure out how to actually study that and understand that. I'd be curious with your kind of view on that. I know, I'm pretty naive to it. I know it's hey, it's important, and then eat fermented foods, right? But I'm sure there's more to it than that. But yeah, what do you have to say about gut biome and gut health?
The gut microbiome is a fascinating thing. I mean, there's obviously microbiomes all over the body, our mouth, our brain, every surface practically has a microbiome. But the gut microbiome is interesting because there are as many cells in the gut microbiome as there are in our body. So it's almost like we are living our lives with another group of cells, another organism, if you will. Only interestingly, this organism is immortal. When we die, our gut microbiome will live on, and it go on. So we're sort of the host for that. But yeah, our whole understanding of gut microbiome is it's very, very rudimentary now, but it's progressing a lot. These metabolic factors, the diets help a lot. You mentioned probiotics and prebiotics and all these things, fermented foods, and these are all valuable. I recommend them. You can't go wrong with it. It's not gonna hurt you. And similarly, we want to be judicious about things that harm our gut microbiome, like antibiotics. Used to give antibiotics to kids and or adults, and they take them and they wipe out their gut microbiome, and then it repopulates. An interesting thing I wasn't aware of, is talking about microbiomes when I wrote this book, was that, mouthwash, right? I hope Listerine is not a sponsor of your podcast. So you're about to lose them. No. Yeah. Mouthwashes are designed to be antibacterial. And so you gargle in them, we all know, and it makes our breath better, but kills all the bacteria. It doesn't kill all of them, but it reduces the bacteria. The problem is there are a lot of healthy bacteria in our mouth, some that make things like nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a molecule that causes our blood vessels to relax. That's why Viagra and Cialis work, but also in the brain and heart attacks, and hypertension. It's very, very important. When you kill when you use mouthwash, you kill those bacteria, and then it repopulates with something else, but it may or may not repopulate with that one. And the evidence for that is that, and there's some studies we talk about in the book, that people who use mouthwash regularly are more likely to have hypertension than those that don't, presumably through that mechanism. Then there are also very bad bacteria in our mouth, so-called pathogenic ones, like P. gingivalis is one, which surprisingly in the last few years, it's discovered that this oral bacteria is found in the plaques of people who have heart attacks, in the blood vessels. It's also found in the brains of people who have Alzheimer's disease. So, there's this whole question about the role of microbes in these two leading chronic diseases. And the answer's still unknown, but probably stop using mouthwash.
Pull back on that. Yeah, brush your teeth, floss, right? Stick to the kind of manual cleaning. Um, as we're nearing towards the end here, I'm curious for our listeners if they feel inspired by this conversation. Like, what are some low-hanging fruit changes that they can make, in your 4 different lifestyle pillars? I mean, I'm hearing one is like cut out seed oils. That seems, you can do that. I'm wondering, are there any other kind of like starting steps? Because again, what I hear from people is that they get overwhelmed by like the wealth of information out there.
Yeah, too much information. Well, simple things, what I did too on my nutrition, I didn't change anything I ate. That's another level. But what I did was simply, my mom, the dietitian, and much of food advice today is to eat many small meals throughout the day. That's supposedly the healthy thing. Well, getting back to inflammation, remember, inflammation is the body's response to foreign material. What's food? Food's foreign material. So anytime we eat something in our gut, we turn on inflammation. It's a normal, healthy response. The problem is when you eat all the time, inflammation is turned on all the time, and we're not designed to eat all the time. In fact, as hunter-gatherers, we probably ate for a while and maybe didn't eat for a couple days, few days, and so first thing I did was just changed when I ate. I cut out between meal snacks, and then you may want to skip breakfast. You may want to skip lunch even. And, now I have 1 or 2 meals a day usually with that. So that's something you can do just as a beginning, a very simple thing.
Yeah, so like an intermittent fasting type of
Yeah,
deal, right?
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. How about on the other ones around like exercise or, stress reduction or sleep? Like, what are some other quick tips that
Yeah.
people could do?
I mean, sleep quantity and quality matters. Despite what Elon Musk says about sleeping 4 hours, the evidence is pretty strong that your literally your risk of chronic disease goes up if you sleep much less than 6 or 7 hours, or more than 9 or 10 hours. So there's a very narrow window that most people need a certain amount of sleep, and it really matters. Not only the quantity, but also the quality. Other thing about exercise, it's back to the sort of along the same testosterone lines. Most people aren't aware that the older you get, you lose muscle mass, right? And one of the most powerful longevity strategies and improving metabolic health is strength training, which basically boils down to lifting weights and going to the gym. And I'm surprised that, other than orthopedic surgeons, how few doctors and my colleagues have ever lifted weights or anything like that. And that's I think it's becoming more and more people are becoming more and more aware of it, but it's isn't something that's widely known yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's another myth, right? Because I think medicine has been all about like endurance. Or like, oh, like go jog, right? Or go walk or do things like that, which is, good for you. But yeah, not many people are talking about lifting or doing like any kind of resistance-based training.
Right, right. It is something about, I mean, everyone, it used to be cardio and get your heart rate up and everything like that, but there's really value, and it's essential to do resistance training where it can be your own body weight, or you can do free weights or machines, or there are a number of ways. You don't have to join a gym to do it, but get into the habit to do it and actually build up your muscles, because your muscles improve your metabolism, they improve your insulin resistance, and they make you less likely to age as rapidly or fall down and all sorts of things like that. The single most powerful source of brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is BDNF, which makes things like our hippocampus enlarge and our brains grow, is from exercise.
Yeah. Yeah, totally, right. I mean, like the neuroplastic results are like incredible, right? Of like being able to like learn and grow and have new patterns. So I've always recommending that for my clients too. So final question is like, we talked a little bit about politics and policy. You don't have to get into naming names or whatever right now, right? But like, I'm curious if you could have a magic policy get put out or a regulation or some kind of control, like what do you think direction this country needs to take to have a healthier population? Because I don't think it's that controversial to say that. I think American population is maybe one of the most unhealthy populations on the planet, and that is terrifying,
Yeah, and it is, despite we spend more than other people on healthcare, and it's not a matter of we don't need to spend more money. We need to spend the money the right way, and it's become so politicized. I love my Republican friends. I love my Democrat friends. I wish they could get together. Make America healthy again shouldn't be a political statement. It should be something we all embrace regardless of politics, because we're facing an epidemic with chronic disease that makes COVID-19 look like nothing. If you look at the numbers, and it's finally getting some of the attention that it deserves. And I'm really hopeful that, seed oils stay in the conversation. uh, sugar, carbohydrates. People start talking about these things, these lifestyle factors that matter, and it becomes to the point where, today, if I walk over to a 6-year-old and hand him a lighted cigarette in my school, I'll be jumped by 10 parents and wrestled to the floor. But if I walk over to that same child and hand them a bowl of sugar cereal sweetened with chocolate milk, everyone will smile and say, "What a great dad that is." That needs to change.
I agree. I mean, so does the next cigarettes, right? I mean, the diabetes and obesity epidemic in children is out of control. And like you said, yeah, it's like hopefully now starting to get talked about a little bit more, you know. Um, so yeah, Rob, I've really enjoyed this conversation. If people want to learn more, if they want to buy the book, if they want to follow you, where can they find you online?
Oh, yeah, my website is simple. It's just my name, robertlufkinmd.com, and I have a copy of you can download a free first chapter of the book in audio and PDF form if you'd like, and see before you spend any money on it or go to the library to get it. Check it out, see if you like it. I'm also active on social media. My wife says too active, but please say hi if you see me there.
Awesome. Yeah, listeners, check all the stuff out. That will be in the show notes. We've had some questions about where the show notes are there. There's the description of this podcast. So whatever you're listening to, click on more or read more or whatever it says, and all that stuff will be there, as well as the link to the free chapter of the book. So it's a good read. I'd highly recommend to start just like thinking about health differently. And I think if you felt, angry at the health system or betrayed or let down, Lies I Taught in Medical School is a great place to start to see like, hey, there's other ways to look at this. And it's not all one message. So Dr. Lufkin, thank you again for joining us on the show.
Hey, thanks so much, Mark. This is a real pleasure.
And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, do all the social stuff, like, share, subscribe, you know what to do. And send this episode to somebody that is, focused on health or on longevity, right? And wants to live longer, wants to be healthier. Send to somebody who maybe is trying to get some motivation to make a big change in their life. Maybe they're trying to lose some weight or build some muscle, or overcome a chronic disease. I think talking to Rob is really helpful. And hearing people just talk about these in an open, honest way can help keep that motivation going. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.